we got it fixed on that. All right. Excuse me, I'm sorry, man. All right. I'm excited to be able to present this lesson to you. This morning I was getting it prepared, and obviously, like Brad had said, I have been working on this quite a bit, trying to get down here, and I appreciate, as always, everybody that gave me any little tip or little insight to what I needed to be looking at or need to be following and tracking down all those leads. But this will end our study of church history. What we're going to look at is the church coming into Crockett County this morning. So when we're looking at this, I hope it's beneficial to you. I will try to have my notes available. So if you the PowerPoint's going through, like, well, I didn't get something, I will make that available to you. I'd really rather try to get it a little bit more presentable because there's just bullet points in my lesson. Get a little bit more presentable and have it out here for anybody that wants that. So if you have that, we're going to try to put a copy of the notes back in the library. And I talked to the library over at Alamo because they have been very helpful with that. And they said, yes, if you want to bring a copy of that and put in, they've got, if you ever want to dig into this a little bit more, if you go to the library, they've got filing cabinets and they have information on churches in all through the county, any church that's ever been here, plenty of records on all that stuff. So it's an exciting dig. So I'll put that in with the Murray City folder that's in there. This is where I got a lot of my notes from Brother Lester Bates, and I will make reference to that when we get there. But he helped me tremendously, and I think about that, though dead yet he speaketh. He helped me tremendously in his research that got us back to 1907, but I wanted to go back a little further than that. So what we're looking at this morning is the idea that the church that I read about in the New Testament, right? I read about in Acts chapter 2 about this church being established. How do we get from Jerusalem, right around AD 30, AD 33, whatever date you want to hold to, and we say, how do I get the church from there to 2024 in Crockett County? And how do we get here? So it's been great, and I said we looked, and we won't take the time to rehash the falling away, the Reformation movement, the Restoration movement. What we want to look at this morning is begin in 1801. So what we're going to notice in this is we're going to go not year by year, but we're going to progress as things happened year at a time. And I think this will be an easy way to teach this material, in that we're going to look at as it progresses and as it has to deal with Tennessee, and we're going to be comparing the Reformation or the Restoration movement along with what's events that are happening in Crockett County. And if you ever want any of these PowerPoint lessons, if you will give me a thumb drive, I will happily give you all of these PowerPoints. You can have every slide that I've got on here, and these slides were taken directly from my notes as well. So if that would be helpful to you, I know some people like it different ways, how they get their material, but any which way you want it, you just let me know and I will get it for you. Now, what we're looking at, 1801, the Cane Ridge Revival in Kentucky. So this is important because what's happening, again, 1776, America's gained their independence. People are coming from the Puritans. They're coming from England, those individuals over on the Mayflower, and then also those in Jamestown. And we're saying, all right, you have the Episcopal, the Church of England, then you have these individuals, these Puritans, they're trying to come back. So we have a lot of the denominations that we hear about today, the Methodist with John Wesley and that bunch coming over. We have the Baptists and those bunch coming over, the Presbyterians and that bunch coming over. So Barton W. Stone, the man that's going to hold this Cane Ridge Revival, was a Presbyterian. But again, what we're seeing is this enlightenment of individuals reading and they're studying. And what they're saying is, well, this isn't lining up with the Bible. Why are we not all in unity? If the Bible, and again, they take it for the Word of God, which it is, and they say if the Bible is the inspired Word of God and we just follow that, why can't we all just be in unison? We talk about that even today of family members that say, well, one Sunday he goes here, one Sunday my kid goes there. Think, well, wouldn't God want a church where everybody could get together and all be together as a family? Absolutely. He only created one church, and that's what we're trying to get to, and that's what these individuals are trying to get to, is they're saying, let's go back to the Bible. So, 1801, They have the Cane Ridge Revival, and they're finding out that they're preaching the gospel, right, using the Bible, not the handbooks. They're preaching the Bible, and people are responding. But at that time, that was unfamiliar because they were looking for the Holy Spirit to act upon them. So they're really looking for them to be more adamant or animated when they were saved. So they're noticing this. Now, 1804, again, Barton W. Stone and these 7 men, they make the last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery. These men all get together and say, this isn't right. This presbytery is not biblical. It's not scriptural. We can't continue to do this. So they make a will and testament, essentially like this presbytery is dead. This is the will and testament. We're going past this. So this is important that this type of activity was already occurring before we get to Alexander Campbell and Thomas Campbell. So many people look at the Church of Christ and they say, they're just a movement of Campbell. They're Campbellites. We'll get into that here in a moment. And they say, well, this was really just a movement from them. But what we find is that this stuff was already occurring in Kentucky and Ohio. So 1807, Thomas Campbell comes. He's a Presbyterian as well. He gets over here. He reads. He studies. Same thing. He says, we can't be a part of this. Alexander Campbell's still in Ireland. And he's reading, and he's studying, and he's understanding. This isn't right either. They meet together in 1809, and both of them say, hey, I've been reading, I've been studying. We can't continue to go through this. We can't be a part of this. So thus begins this great awakening, they would say, to where people are beginning to write stuff. They're beginning to really study the Scripture and lean on that more than they are any human creeds. Now, that's the restoration side of it. 1824, what we have is the territory that is now Crockett County, that will be making up into this county, first begins to be settled. So that's amazing to me 200 years ago. Now the Chickasaw Indians, at least what I've been told, let me make a note on that. This information is what I could find written down. Many people told me many things, and if it lined up, I would include it. But I tried to just put what I could find written down because you know how it is. Some people, grandparents told somebody this, and I don't know. I usually don't use that unless I hear it from 2 other individuals or, at least at the mouth of 2 witnesses, that I put it down as fact. So anyway, this is stuff that I have written down or found written down. So this is, again, it may be off a year or 2, but this is consistent. So 1824, the Chickasaw Indians, they're inhabiting Tennessee. And you have to remember that I think it's 1796 is when Tennessee actually becomes a state. It was a part of North Carolina, and they cut it off. They're over in the mountains. Tennessee goes from the mountains to Mississippi. We have Tennessee. So 1824, these individuals begin to come down into this territory. Now, in 1825, the records that we have kept, or at least what we could get, was that there was no singular religious organization. There was no church building. Nothing was moved down into this area as early as in 1825. But, and I know I talked to many of y'all, we hear the term the circuit rider of the Methodist Church, and that's exactly what happened. The circuit riders would begin to come around. They would be on horseback, and essentially what they do is they would strike out and they would preach at different congregations through the area. So we have a Methodist circuit rider coming into this area of Crockett County. In fact, I don't know if it's the oldest, but the Pond Creek Methodist Church down here, that's one of the older congregations in the county as well. So anyway, these riders begin to come into the area, and they're doing this. So again, so this is 1825. Crockett County, this area of Crockett County, it's not Crockett County yet, but it's becoming active in stuff going on. Now, back to the restoration. So what's happening at this time, right? People are coming into Tennessee. They're coming into West Tennessee. And in 1826, we have Barton W. Stone. He's going to establish the Christian Messenger. So this is a publication that he's going to send out. And he's going to be, again, these are mailed out to individuals. They're brought about. And then in 1830, we have Alexander Campbell establishing the Millennial Harbinger. Now, that one is important. We're going to get to it here in just a moment. 1830, Campbell's writing the Millennial Harbinger. Now, he's talking about, let's go back to the Bible, let's go back to the Bible, let's go, and what he'll do a lot of times is he's taking debates and taking things that people were saying at that time, and he's refuting those, again, what we see in publications today. So these things were happening in 1830, and again, how wonderful it is that we have the internet, Facebook, YouTube, all that stuff, these platforms, publications. We can reach such a broader audience than just what we have here, and that's exactly what these men were doing as well. Now, that's restoration. Let's go back to Crockett County. 1830 in Crockett County. Again, we're just becoming settled in here. It says 8 to 10 farmers living in the neighborhood of what is now Johnson's Grove. So I don't know exactly where at in Johnson Grove. Went to work and erected the regular meeting house in the county. Now, according to the paperwork that I read, Johnson Grove eventually got bought out by the Baptist Church. So we have Johnson Grove Baptist Church. So I do not know if this pole barn essentially is what it was, if this was down in that area or another part of Johnson Grove, but needless to say that they have this building, essentially a pole barn being erected, and any denomination can come in and worship, do whatever they want, right? Any denomination coming in. Now, interestingly enough, when you look at the history of Murray City, that there was also about the same year some farmers that set up a log meeting house in the village that would be known as Murray City, and they gave it the name Palmyra. So you may have heard of that, I don't know. Some of y'all who may have heard people back in the past. It was named after a lady that donated the land, but it was a log meeting house, and it was sitting up right up here in town. But anyway, that before the town became a town, because again, we're just settling in the area, so it's just a village at this point. Now, still in Crockett County, the inconvenience of reaching their respective county seats induced the people living in the fractions of Haywood, Gibson, Madison, and Dyer counties lying between the middle and south forks of Fork Deer River. They took steps looking for the formation of a new county as early as 1832 to 1833. So what we're having is, and I'll have a map here in just a moment that'll show these fractions. So the county, the corners of the counties are too big. They said, we've got to do something different. Again, during bad weather, trying to pass through the rivers and things like that. Again, not having the bridges and the highways like we have today. They said, we've got to do something about it. So they began to look at forming the county. So we can't say Murray City like we think of it today, because this is 1830s and the county's not a county. And so there's still fractions of these other counties going on. Now, 1840, and this is across the board pretty regular, that in 1840 the Alamo Christian Church was founded in what is known as Cageville. So Alamo was at one time Cageville. It didn't get its name changed to Alamo until after it became a county, and obviously in dedication to Davy Crockett. We think of Crockett County and then Alamo. So have to make sure that those events happened before, so Crockett County couldn't exist before that. Now, what I want to make note of here as we continue on, that we're looking at the Christian church, Alamo Christian Church. What we're going to hear as we progress through this religious movement coming down is Christian. They get that word because Barton W. Stone, what they took was they said, I don't want to be a Baptist, I don't want to be a Methodist, I don't want to be a Presbyterian, I want to be a Christian, because Christians is mentioned in the Bible. They were called Christians. So we say, I want to be a Christian. So what we find is this Christian church. Now, Campbell's followers called themselves disciples. They would say disciples of Christ. So what we find today, if that sounds familiar in your ear, you'll find Christian churches, disciples of Christ Church. You might see those slogans in books, magazines, or on the television, but the disciples of Christ. So these are different individuals, but initially they're coming out, and we talked about this a little bit last week, that it'll be the American Christian Missionary Society, Civil War, and the instrumental music that will break off from this group, or they will break off and they will begin to start the Christian church, and we'll get into that here in just a moment. So Alamo seems to be one of the first ones of the Christian churches that come along. Now, 1847, so we're progressing pretty good here. The Christians, or Campbellites, effected an organization and held regular services at Old Liberty. Now, Old Liberty is the barn, or the pole barn, that's constructed down on Johnson's Grove. So what they called that, every denomination can come in and be a part of this. It's called Old Liberty, and down on Johnson Grove. And this time we have record in 1847 that the Christians, again, followers of Campbell and Stone, or Campbellites, as it's referred to in that report, they held regular services. But we find in 1850, they built a church down on Chestnut Bluff. Now, there still is a First Christian Church down at Chestnut Bluff. I'm not sure if that's the same church or if it's affiliated with that individual. But again, remember, at this time we're hearing Christian Church, Christian Church. Now, about the same time, the Christians built Miller's Chapel. Now, this is interesting, Miller's Chapel. It's going to be one of the oldest churches in the state. And it's going to remain, what we're going to see is when, and Miss Brenda asked that question last Sunday, did the Christian church break off from the Church of Christ or the Church of Christ break off from the Christian church? It depends on how you want to look at it. I think the Christian churches were in buildings and the Church of Christ left the building and started, but the movement of going back to the Bible was the Church of Christ, and the Christian church broke off from that. So it just depends on how you want to view that. But Miller's Chapel is interesting because Miller's Chapel starts out as a Christian church and they remain a Church of Christ. That's recorded back for them again in the 1840s as being a Church of Christ back over in Miller's Chapel. That's off on Bonaccord over in Dyer County. But remember, we don't have Crockett County right now. Dyer County stretches on into Crockett County. So, the ministers that they're going to have, John Nash, that Elihu Scott, he's influential. Because what I was trying to look for is these men that were hearing individuals teach this restoration type message and come in through there. So these men, Elihu Scott, John R. Williams, and if you recall, J.D. Tant, we talked about him. All these men taught at Miller's Chapel. All of them spoke and preached at Miller's Chapel. And this Brody Hardiman, I couldn't get any dates on that. It may be N.B. Hardiman. It depends on when they go and do this. The same man that helps establish Freed Hardiman. We're going to get to that as well. But he had a son named Brody, so I don't know. N.B., I never heard him go by anything but N.B., so it appears that it might have been his son that was doing that. But nonetheless, these men influential in this congregation. But again, the J.D. Tant, he's this restoration preacher. John R. Williams and Elihu Scott, these were men that were hearing these messages and coming down into Dyer County at the time and preaching around these areas. So we'll get back to some of that here in just a moment. All right, now that's Crockett County. So we have ourselves in the 1840s. Now, 1849, again, roundabout. Again, not a hard, fast date. The American Christian Missionary Society is established, 1849. So this is monumental because this is what's going to start dividing the church. So 1849. 1851, you have the first question. We talked about that last Sunday. The question arose, can I use instrumental music in worship, right? Are we allowed to do this? So we're finding this again in the mid-1800s. Now, this was fascinating to me when we got this. So let's go back. Again, so what we're trying to do is look at the Restoration Movement. So all of this is occurring in the mid-1850s. So we're beginning to hear this. People are beginning to hear these things in their publications. The talk is going around, should we add instrumental music or not? Then we find back in Crockett County in 1852, this fella H.H. Fife, John W. Conley, and W.W. Nance. Now, William W. Nance is important. They're acting as treasurers from this religious group, purchased a lot and constructed a house of worship at Cageville. So it appears through the notes that these individuals were meeting in houses. They were meeting in farmhouses. They would be in that community. They would come together. They would worship. But when we find here, 1852, they're still the congregation, but they build a building. Now, 1854, I've got the record, or not, I mean, that actual, but I've got a picture of this article. 1854, William W. Nance, the same one there that was mentioned before, a preacher, so he's a preacher of the gospel, was a subscriber to Alexander Campbell's Millennial Harbinger and gave a report about the work he was involved with in Cageville, or now Alamo, at that time, Gibson County. So again, Crockett County is not established yet. So Mr. Nance would write to the Millennial Harbinger, and in his report he would say that within 40 miles of that area, there were 12 of these Christian churches established. Now, I can't find all of those, but again, the way the Church of Christ is set up is what? We're autonomous. So we don't We don't put our attendance records into anything. We don't do any history other than what some foolish preacher wants to try to fool with. We don't have any of that recorded unless you go to that congregation. So we don't know about like Alamo and some of these other ones. So we don't really have this type of organization within the separate churches. So he's saying that within 40 miles there's 12 congregations. And he says that the church has been established for 4 years, and they had about 60 members at that time. So again, this is 1854 that this is occurring. Again, that's what the statements made in the Millennial Harbinger that this fella, Mr. Nance, would write to us. Now, so that's happening in Crockett County. We have the Christian churches being established, Miller's Chapel, Alamo, and then we have all of this other stuff happening around the Brotherhood, the restoration movement of instrumental music coming in. Now, 1860. We've got the melodeon. We talked about that last week. The melodeon comes to Midway, Kentucky, and we talked about that they brought it in initially because they couldn't get the tune right when they sang, and then they said, well, it sounds better with the instrumental music, and here we go. So the churches begin to put instrumental music in their assembly. Now, 1861, 1865, you've got the American Civil War. So this is monumental because the churches are divided on the topics of the Civil War. And really, during that time, many of the band go out to war. They have to get, the Union would come through and pick up some. The Confederacy would come through and pick up some. And they just didn't really have the meetings like what they had prior to that. So this is all happening nationwide. So what we're finding now is this tinderbox of the church about to split, essentially, the Christian church. And we're going to get to that. Now, going back home. The records show, now again, what I can gather from my written notes that I have available to me at the library, around 1870, the Cairo Church of Christ begins to meet. Now again, they may not have established a building, but they have at least established a meeting place. They're coming together. They have a congregation. 1870. Now, in the early days of Gadsden, members of the church, now known as the Gadsden Church of Christ, went back to Mason's Grove. And I think Miss Doris and I were going down through there the other day and are traveling around Mason's Grove to attend church. But by 1870, a church was built where the old school building near the Nora Porter residence. Now, that doesn't mean as much to me as it may be to y'all. I don't know a lot of these names. But again, the important thing, Gadsden, 1870, Cairo, 1870. Now, a lot of that, too, has to be like the location, the railroads, things like that, right? Why we get these congregations starting first, maybe. All right, now, 1871. The Second Act was passed by the General Assembly on November 23rd, 1871, authorizing the formation of Crockett County out of the fractions of the counties of Haywood, Gibson, Madison, and Dyer. So at this point in the early 1800s, and it was fascinating because I looked for churches in Crockett County and I couldn't find anything until the 1870s, 1880s, but Crockett County wasn't a county until then, so that's why. 1872, Crockett County was established and named after Davy Crockett, right? We've talked about that. So here's a sketch of kind of how it was broken up, or at least what they render it. So you can see how Dyer County stretching in there, Haywood, a big portion of Crockett County being Haywood County, and then Gibson and Madison County in like that. So Alamo being there in Gibson County is where we find that from Cageville. So after they call it Crockett County, again, Alamo becoming the county seat after Davy Crockett in the Alamo. So, all right, now, let's look at this because this is interesting as well. It's all interesting. I'll say that 100 times as we go through this. All right, 1874. We're progressing through here. 3 families, J.F. and Minerva Brigance, P.W. and Sarah Moore, and Moses and Mary Cox. Now, this fellow Moses Cox is important. And that's some of Miss Doris's family. Each deeded 1 acre of land in Coxville community to trustees of the Christian church. Now, again, notice this Christian church. But this was the beginning of the Coxville Church of Christ. So these are another congregation like Miller's Chapel that initiated out of the Restoration movement were the Christian church, but when this split is about to they take on the name Church of Christ. And we're going to talk about that here in just as we get further down through there, the idea of how we get the name Church of Christ. But the Coxville, and that's amazing because this fellow Moses Cox that would come down, he's buried out there in that cemetery. And what's interesting is his father actually came from Glasgow, Kentucky. So we think, well, what does that mean? Remember, Stone's movement's all happening in Kentucky, and a man named John Mulkey would be working out of Glasgow, Kentucky. And I know, at least on my side, my family's history with that, the Roans Creek Church over in Carroll County around Lexington, where my family came from, John Mulkey was one of the guys that came down and influenced that congregation. So I don't know that Moses Cox had any affiliation with any of the teaching of John Mulkey, but it's interesting that this man's father comes out of Kentucky, and then Moses is going to be one of the individuals that's going to deed this land for the Church of Christ, and we find the beginning there. So around 1873, 1874 is where we have Cox Chapel, Church of Christ, being established. Now, 1875, the same man, William W. Nance, donates 1 acre of land on the southeast corner of present-day Nance Road, Tennessee Highway 152, for the construction of a school building for the children in the Nance, Quincy, and Cairo communities, and the school is first known as Nance Academy. Now, this is the same William W. Nance that was affiliated with the Alamo Christian Church, that wrote to the Millennial Harbinger, but what we're going to find is he's going to actually establish a Church of Christ, or he's not, maybe I shouldn't say that. He's going to be working toward helping them, the school building being set up, which would eventually be the Nance Church of Christ. So he's going to be beneficial in that. And it seems through the notes, with him being affiliated with Campbell with the Millennial Harbinger, that he's going to be going through that, and he's again going to set up this Nance Church of Christ, as we'll see. Now, this is another interesting point about this fella here. 1882, we're going to talk about the first Christian church being established in Crockett Mills. So we still have the first Christian church being down there in Crockett Mills today. Don't know that it was the same building, but it's a fairly old, large building, so it might be or added on to. But this fella, J.F. Robertson, he is going to pretty much donate the entirety of the money in order to build this church. Now, this is where it really gets interesting. This man from Crockett Mills, he's going to have a daughter, and she's going to die. Her name is George Ann, and she's going to die at the age of 21. And he's going to contribute $5,000. Now, this is 1882 money we're talking about, not 2024. 1884 money, $5,000 to the struggling West Tennessee Christian College in 1879, or 1897. Y'all know from Wednesday night class my numbers, they go together. All right, 1897, that's why we have them on the board. So he's going to donate this to the West Tennessee Christian College. Now the name, he renamed it, obviously donating that handsome bit of money. They renamed the college the Georgie Robertson Christian College. So these things are popping up in the area. You've got the Bethany College, the Buffalo College. These things are popping up, and men are beginning to educate and have a kind of a Christian background with this. So a building was built and named the Georgie Robertson Building. So this is all from this fella, J.F. Robertson from Crockett Mills. Now, it's renamed the Milan Sitka Building, and serving the college and the people of Henderson, Tennessee for about 107 years. Now, the Georgie Robertson Christian College existed for about 11 years, and then it was finally closed in 1908. And then in 1909, it became known as Freed-Hardeman College, and then it finally received the university status in 1990. So it's amazing to me that this man, Robertson from Crockett Mills, he didn't set up Freed-Hardeman, obviously don't take it like that, but he donated the money for a building being built, and eventually it becomes part of Freed-Hardeman College. So I found that very fascinating that he's a guy down the road in Crockett Mills that was able to do this. So again, he's starting this first Christian church down in Alamo, or in Crockett Mills. Now, 1884, we find the Antioch Church of Christ being established, and again, by my notes, down here on Antioch Road. And we find that the worship services of the Nance Church of Christ in the Academy building began in 1890. So we have these individuals building this church or building this school building, and then in 1890 we have the families moving in and they become part of the Nance Church of Christ. So fascinating how all of this is going about. So between 1870 and the mid-1880s, and then maybe even in 1890, we really have a lot of these churches beginning to grow in what is now Crockett County. Now, let's go back to the restoration movement for just a moment. Now, this is where we're going to see the division. 1889. So we're hearing Christian church, we're hearing Church of Christ. all coming from the same religious, the religious men, Stone and Campbell. 1889. These individuals would get together in the Sand Creek Address and Declaration, and they're going to begin to circulate this document throughout the brotherhood. And they're going to say that in this document, the innovating brethren, right, the progressive, what we would call them today, brethren, those who had added instrumental music and the missionary society had departed from the gospel. And unless they surrendered these, they could not be considered brethren. So what we have is in around 1889, 1890, these individuals are saying if you're going to continue to use the instrument and you're going to continue to be a part of the American Christian Missionary Society, you have gone away from just the Bible. We don't find the authorization for instrumental music. We don't find the authorization for the Missionary Society. We can't have these things. You need to stop doing this. So we can't fellowship with you, right? We get that today. We withdraw. We say we can't fellowship, and we do that today, right? You have congregations, and they're what we would call liberal congregations, and they say, well, they have a woman preacher or they have a woman leading prayer. We don't fellowship with those churches, right? We don't go to anything. We don't help them out. We don't do any of that stuff. So that's essentially what's happening in 1889. Now, look at this. The Declaration in 1892 went a step farther, strongly recommending that every church that bought property, listen to this, should put a clause in the deed declaring that no instrument of music or other innovation should ever be used on the premises. And that is written in the Murray City Church of Christ bylaws. We can't have, if an instrument is ever brought in, it can no longer be called a Church of Christ. So these were going out through all the brotherhood. They're saying, write it in your bylaws. Well, it's fascinating that Murray City does just that. We got it written in ours. Now, stemming from Campbell's influence came an element that strongly favored calling the church the Disciples of Christ Church. So here we go back to that. We're having a division in this Christian church, if you'll call it that. We think, well, we want to be innovative. We want to be progressive. We want to have the instrumental music. We want to have the missionary society. What are we going to call ourselves? Right? So they say, well, Campbell liked to call himself a disciple. So we get the name Disciples of Christ or the Disciples of Christ Church. Another title, the Christian Church, was more frequently used, which we see in the notes that I was able to obtain. I don't find any Disciples of Christ Church, just Christian Church. And for a few years, except for a few occasions, was very little question. Many people calling it the Christian Church. Now, what's interesting is we don't find those two names even in the Bible. We go to Romans chapter 16, verse 16. The churches of Christ salute you. This name is biblical. It can be defended. These individuals are saying, well, we're going to be called the Disciples of Christ Church. And I said, well, we still can't find that in the Bible. You're just like the denominations saying, well, I'm just going to take this name and run with it. Well, no, that's what the denominations did. So we'll find, so we'll be the Christian church. Well, you don't find the Christian church in Scripture either. So they say, what about this, right? So W.K. Pendleton, you will remind yourselves of him, that's Campbell's son-in-law. He disagreed with Campbell. And he said there's only 4 terms in the Scripture that we can call ourselves: disciples, saints, believers, or brethren. Those are the biblical names. So Pendleton found no reason to adopt the title Disciple of Christ. Again, Romans 16:16, Churches of Christ. Now, what we're going to have here is in the brotherhood is in 1906, they're going to have a religious survey that is going to go about. They're going to ask individuals what faith they are a part of. And what we find now in 1906 or 1907 is the firm distinction between Disciples of Christ, Christian Church, and the Church of Christ. Now, what we find again is like Miller's Chapel, Cox Chapel, it seemed that they didn't want to follow away with the Christian church. They stuck with saying, no, we're going to be the Church of Christ. And again, Cairo, Nance, all these, Antioch, were all registered as Church of Christ. They were none. So again, we talked about that before. These breaks were starting beforehand. People were able to see we can't do this. So we don't have much history on that, at least. At these times, we have them registered in the documents that they were Churches of Christ. So, 1906, the census goes out. There's a strong division. You have the Christian churches or Disciples of Christ. They took their instruments and their missionary society and walked a new course. So, going back to what Miss Brenda was asking there again last Sunday, in a sense, they broke off from the church. But what we have is they say, well, like you might have a congregation that is a First Christian Church. Again, first just means it's the first one in the area. So the First Christian Church, they break away from that and start a Church of Christ. So however which way you want to look at it, but as far as the teachings, Miss Brenda was right in the sense that they broke off from this restoration movement. They said, we want to go back to the Bible. We want the authority of the Bible. We want the authority of the Scripture. And they said, well, we'd rather have our instrumental music and our missionary society. Now, here at the close, and for time's sake, let's look at this, 1907. Now, this is from Brother Lester Bates. All of this, and I don't have it all typed out because he's got it all laid out for us. And again, if you want these things, you're welcome to any of it that you want. I'll try to have it written up a little better for you if you would rather wait a little bit. But for the Murray City Church of Christ. So here we go. We've looked at these people coming down out of Kentucky. We've looked at these people coming down into West Tennessee, the Christian church on Johnson Grove Road. We've looked at them establishing churches. We've got Chestnut Bluff, Miller's Chapel, Alamo, Crockett Mills, all of these churches in the area. Then we find in the late 1800s that the churches of Christ are being established. So how do we get to the Murray City Church of Christ? Well, in 1907, we find that the meeting was held in a tent in a wooded area belonging to David Thompson, who would later become an elder. Again, all of this is Brother Bates' notes. So 1907 is when in this community, people began to gather and to begin to worship. So what he noted was that there were several families from the Antioch congregation that made up the nucleus of the new congregation. Not that there was a split or division or people were mad. I don't think it's so much like that. I think it was probably more, it was just more convenient because, again, this is horse and buggy time. You're walking to church, you're riding a buggy to church. So they said, well, it's quicker for us just to get to Murray City than it is to maybe go all the way down on the Antioch. So we're just going to worship here. Or at least I couldn't find anything of why the Antioch church would begin to come. Not all of them, and that's important too. It's not the whole Antioch church. It's just a fraction of these people coming and becoming a part of the church that's meeting here in Murray City. So 1907, they decided to build a frame house on a lot owned by John McNatt, who also would later become an elder. And this property was on Claybrook Street opposite the John Nance house. So I think of Mr. Harold, he was showing me back where this wood frame house was originally. Now, 1924. So 1907, it's starting. 1924, they moved the frame building down to downtown, a lot adjacent to the Stanley Hotel. So I think it's sitting where the old or the brick building is now, but I may be wrong in that. But I think it was sitting there originally, the wood frame house. Mr. Harold told me they brought it down here with mules. Miss Brenda, she's grinning because I think her mother, and then they rode in the building as it came down to where it sat then there. Okay. Yeah, that's the other one. So again, I've heard it from Miss Brenda and Mr. Harold that they, not on top of the house or the church house or anything like that, but rode in the church house as they were bringing it down by mules down here. And it was where the brick building is now, right? Miss Brenda, do you know? All right, that's okay. Yeah. So they built it there. Now, 1935, a tornado destroys. Again, they bring it down to that area. It destroys the original frame building, and they replace it with a brick building, which is what's in town now. That we still have today. It was the furniture store there after the church moved out. But that brick building, 1935, they build that and they set that up, which is interesting because the courthouse records that land back in 1924 as being established for the building, but they brought the wood frame church to that, and then they build the brick building. Now, the congregation, I found this interesting, met at the Crockett High School gymnasium while the new church was being built. So just down the road there. 1968 is what we have today. So here we're at. 1968, the new building was erected here on Highway 88, where we're meeting today, and it was first services were held on Wednesday night, August 21st. And again, that's all from Brother Bates' notes. Now, again, he's very more detailed as far as who the elders were, who the ministers were, what was going on. If you're wanting to know that kind of information, you're welcome to look at these notes. But that's amazing to me. So here we are, 2024. We've gone from, it's taken us 34 lessons to get from the church being established in Jerusalem there in Acts chapter 2 to the falling away, to the Reformation movement, to the Restoration movement, everyone coming over to America, to the Restoration movement, coming down out of Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, walking their way down into West Tennessee, starting these smaller congregations, people going out and preaching the truth, going to the Bible, to what we have today in the Murray City Church of Christ here in 2024. So amazing to me. So anyway, if you have any questions or comments, I'll take those now. Maybe you have something I forgot to mention. All right. I got us a little past time, but hopefully it was beneficial to you to hear all that. Again, I'll try to write this up and make it a little bit more presentable, but if you want to try to look through my disaster of notes to read through some of that stuff, you're welcome to them. It's a train wreck, so you might want it to be a little more organized when you get it, but you're welcome to any of that stuff. All right. Anybody got anything? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Alexander Campbell said he liked the name, the Disciples of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody thinks we're kind of Campbellites. Is he more a kind of out of the First Christian Church type? Or that would that?
Yeah. Yes. If Tyler Moss brought up the question, the Disciples of Christ, Campbell wanting to be called that, yes, if you go and look at it, again, the library has the history on any congregation in the county. If you look at like the Alamo First Christian or congregations like that, they trace theirs back to Campbell. They do. They want to pull themselves all the way back through the Restoration movement. But what we can see is that they really departed because they have instrumental music, and we don't see this coming in any of this movement until a fraction decides this is what we need, and they move out from that. So Tyler Moss is correct. The Disciples of Christ, the Christian church, do trace themselves back to Campbell and all that as well. Just like we don't trace ours back to that. We just look at these men standing on their shoulders saying, this is where we're getting to the truth. But one point in closing, it's amazing that once we found the truth, right? Once these individuals read the Bible, they found the truth, we don't have any more division out of that. Once they said, let's take the Bible for the standard, for what it is, we'll not go past it, we'll use all of it. We find the church not splitting after that, so almost 150 years, the brotherhood has remained strong. Many people attacking that, and we still remain firm today because we have the truth. Anybody else got anything? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Well, Miss Misty brings out a good point too, all right? So was it straight out of Kentucky into West Tennessee? No. What you have is actually it moving from North Carolina into East Tennessee. They're coming out, again, as the people are progressing through the state, because it was a fraction of North Carolina, to Middle Tennessee with the capital. So yes, if you do the history, I didn't think I'd have enough time to address all of that. But yes, if you are curious about that history, coming into Nashville, coming out of the capital, Middle Tennessee is very prominent. Then we find them moving west after that. So yeah, it didn't start in West Tennessee. The churches in Tennessee didn't start in West Tennessee. But we find that influence coming into this area like that. So yeah, you'll find them in... So again, like the Gospel Advocate starts in Nashville around, it's before the Civil War in the 1850s or so. But yeah, a lot of influence coming out of that. Anybody else? All right, well, I have